Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Audrey Lichter, the Executive Director of Chai Mitzvah, the Resource Center for Jewish Engagement. Today's Scholars Circle topic is From Jerusalem to Washington, the Dynamics of Israel-U.S. Relations, featuring Dr. U.S Saltzman. Chai Mitzvah is a national organization now celebrating its 16th year. We are the sponsor of Scholars Circle and a Jewish resource center that focuses on building community through Jewish engagement programs. We have over 20 curricula tailored for small group conversation for teens and adults, lay and professionally led. For more information, please visit our website at chaimitzvah.org. The Scholars Circle program was inspired by Scott Shea. Scott is our founder and board president who authored a best-selling book, Conspiracy U, A Case Study, which unpacks anti-Zionism conspiracy theories from the left and the right of the political spectrum. You can purchase Scott's book wherever books are sold and on our website with an accompanying curriculum, which has been used with hundreds of college students and others. The curriculum is also taught and recorded by a series with Dr. Andrew Pessin. You will receive all this information in our follow-up email as well. The Scholars Circle hosts lectures by prominent scholars every 2 weeks on topics relating to Israel and the Jewish community, geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues the Jewish community is facing. To that end, each lecture will have a resource guide that will be sent to you after the lecture. A recording of each lecture will be accessible on our website and shared with you through email. We are excited to continue the Scholars Circle program, and we need your support to keep it thriving. Scholars Circle has engaged nearly 3,000 participants since 10/7. Your donation will help us enable us to continue bringing international scholars to you at no charge to share their expertise on the evolving Jewish world in the aftermath of October 7th. Please help us reach our goal of $40,000. To make a donation, please visit chaimitzvah.org and click on the gold menu tab, Scholars Circle, and select Support Scholars Circle. This will also be included in your follow-up email. Thank you for considering supporting this engaging program for all. Our featured scholar tonight is Dr. U.S Saltzman. He is an associate research professor of Israel Studies and the director of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. His scholarship and teaching focuses on international security, Israeli foreign and security policy, U.S. foreign policy, and political psychology. Dr. Saltzman is the author of Securitizing Balance of Power Theory, a polymorphic reconceptualization. He has also written numerous scholarly articles and books and chapters, as well as commentaries in the Los Angeles Times, Haaretz, the Jerusalem Post, and other prominent outlets. Dr. Saltzman earned his PhD in International Relations in 2010. Before I welcome our scholar, a couple of housekeeping items. To submit questions, please use the Q&A button on your screen. Q&A will be held at about 40 minutes into the lecture, but you can submit questions anytime throughout. The lecture recording will be sent to your email in a few days and will also be available on our website at chaimitzvah.org. Now to Dr. Saltzman.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for having me again. Thank you so much, Simon, for the invitation. It is wonderful to be here with you all today. I love these conversations, and I hope that my insights today will be helpful and insightful. Quick reminder, my comments today do not reflect necessarily the views of the university or the Gildenhorn Institute, by only my own analysis of the topic at hand. I'll speak for about 30 minutes or so. I'll try to make it so we can open the floor for Q&A, which is always, as I said in the past, my most favorite part of any talk. So without further ado, let me just share the screen now. All righty. So in the first installment, we talked about the relationship between Israel and the United States, and we largely took the American perspective. We try to address a puzzle that involved the question of why does the United States have such a robust, such an intimate, close relationship with the state of Israel? And we kind of delineated a number of factors or a number of variables, if you wish. Today, we're going to take a different tack and approach the question from Israel's perspective. And to do that, I will try to address a different puzzle and say or ask, what is unique about Israeli foreign and security policy? Is there a Jewish foreign and security policy? Is there something unique that describes the Jewish state's policies when it comes to security and foreign affairs? And as before, I will say that many of the comments I'll kind of slightly skip through, which will hopefully entice you to ask more questions during the Q&A. And I look forward to that conversation as well, but I'll try to be detailed when I possibly can, just to make time. So to me, and I'm pretty computer stupid, as one would say, you can explain foreign and security policy by focusing on software, hence the reference here to computers, and hardware. Software relates to ideas, if you wish, whereas hardware is about the physical or the institutional setting. And if we talk about Israeli foreign and security policy specifically, we are talking about ideology, we talk about identity, we talk about history and memory, religion, obviously, collective ideas, norms, and national character. And I'll try to address some of these in the coming few minutes. Hardware, on the other hand, this is something that I'm going to leave perhaps for the Q&A, mostly relates to institutions. What are the institutions or the structures that were created based on these ideas and circumstances and needs that make Israeli foreign and security policy what it is, quite unique, quite exceptional in a sense. We can talk about the political system or the parliamentary system, about the role of the IDF, the Israeli military, about particular social groups or political groups, ethnic or religious groups, about the economy, the size, the startup nation, and so on and so forth, and about the role of civil society as a determinant, as something that shapes and defines policy. I'll start with the ideational framework, if you wish, with the software. And I'll start with the Jewish side, because I believe that we can explain Israeli foreign and security policy through a prism of two key ideas. On the one hand, Judaism, and on the other hand, Zionism. Now, these are big concepts, obviously, and they are multi-layered. There's multiple ways to kind of to analyze those and to reflect on them. So I'll just briefly try to address some of the key points. From the Jewish dimension of Israeli foreign and security policy, we are talking about the Bible or the Torah as a living text. It is not an ancient text that is being stored in a library somewhere. It is a living text. It talks to people to this very day. It shares all kinds of messages, descriptions, prescriptions, motivations, and so on and so forth. Primarily, it chronicles the history of an ancient people. It is not just a book of laws or a religious text, but rather a historical document as well that comprises or constitutes a significant part of the Jewish psyche, the collective consciousness, this awareness, so to speak. It tells stories, it builds an ethos, it tells a narrative of sorts, and it offers interpretation that are still valid today. For the most part, and Jewish history is quite filled with that, it is about persecution, expulsion, discrimination, violence, and it can be from ancient biblical times, but it is also connected to modern day, and we'll try to make the case for that interpretation in a few seconds. It is about the fact that there's a robust Jewish diaspora. Not all Jews, my apologies, reside within the state of Israel. Many of them, including here in the United States, are here out of choice. They made that determination decades ago, or even today. They remain here. They love and appreciate and feel at home here. But there are other diasporas throughout history. North Africa, Arabic-speaking countries, Islamic world, and so on and so forth. The Bible also has a couple of principles that kind of perhaps define and inform the way that Israeli foreign and security policy sees itself. One is the concept of a chosen people. Not that the Jews are better, but that they have a specific role, if you'd like. You can talk about tikkun olam as one motif, as one slogan, if you wish, or a light unto the nations to become an exemplary model of good behavior, of Jewish values, and so on and so forth. The Torah, the Old Testament, or the Bible also creates a very interesting, very significant and important part of what becomes the narrative of the state of Israel, and that is the connection, the territorial connection to the land of Israel, or Eretz Israel, establishing indigeneity. The Jews are not foreign to that part of the world. It is where they came from. It is where they were, where they became a nation, where they created kingdoms, where the tribes went to. This is where they arrived from Egypt. We'll talk about Passover or the Exodus in a few minutes. But it connects land and people, which is very critical. Not any land, not any place, but this particular one. Now we can talk about another very, very influential and big idea, big, paradigmatic idea, Zionism. Zionism is a political movement. The modern incarnation evolved or reached its peak in the late 19th century as an idea, later on becoming an operational plan or actionable plan, if you wish. And it is about self-emancipation of the Jews. No longer residing within their quote-unquote host countries, but feeling, realizing, like Herzl did, that the only way to secure the future, the fate of the Jewish people is to have their own country. It is about creating a Jewish state for the Jews. This is where they'll be safe in light of persecution, prosecution, pogroms, and so on and so forth. And understanding from his perspective, as he called it, that assimilation is not an option, because whether you are living in Germany or Austria-Hungary or in Spain, you are Jewish regardless of how not Jewish you wish to be or try to display yourself in public. You are Jewish no matter what you do, no matter where you are, regardless of the language that you speak. It's about sovereignty. It's about being self-governing. It's about being the masters of their own fate, as the Israeli Declaration of Independence states. They want to govern. They want to control their own future, their own way of life. But at the same time, it is about seeking acceptance or recognition or legitimacy. It is not just having a Jewish state, but being acknowledged by all the international community as having the right and the ability to sustain, to maintain the Jewish state. And again, using the language of the Israeli Declaration of Independence from May 1948, like any other nations, to be normalized like any other country. Israeli foreign policy is influenced or impacted by this idea of immigration. It is key. The ingathering of the exiles, the diaspora exists, but the best place to be, according to this line of reasoning, in the Jewish state, in the state of Israel. And as a result of that, Israeli foreign and security policy involves itself or deals with immigration, with aliyah. And even the term is very interesting because aliyah means to ascend, to rise. Israel is also about strong military force. It's about self-reliance. It is about being able to protect yourself. It is about achieving your goals backed by a robust military presence. And we'll talk about that perhaps in a few minutes. Theodor Herzl had a JD degree from the university in Austria, was a law student, and as a result had a kind of emphasized strongly the role of international diplomacy and international law. And indeed, during the deliberations towards the creation of the State of Israel, both the partition plan or the vote on the partition plan in November 1947, the United Nations plays a significant role. International law, international institutions, we'll get back to that in a few seconds. But this is something that he cared very dearly about. But nevertheless, there's a paradox or a set of paradoxes in Israeli foreign and security policy. And I try to capture these, or some of these, in a number of quotes from prominent practitioners, leaders, and some texts as well. And I wanted to start with Passover, because we just celebrated Passover the other week. And one of the things that the Haggadah tells us, that it is required to repeat, to say, to acknowledge every time, every year during Passover, in each and every generation, they rise up against us to destroy us. This idea that the Jews are being persecuted, that are being attacked over millennia, regardless of where they are and what is the period. Very, very significant. The sense of almost siege mentality, almost paranoia, but that has a very strong backing. It is very, very logical given the history of the Jewish people. Also of redemption, of liberation, of self-sufficiency, of self-emancipation, if you wish. In each and every generation, a person is obligated to see himself as if he left Egypt. This idea from bondage to liberation, Exodus. Ben-Gurion used to quote this multiple times in multiple contexts. The Jews are a people dwelling alone, not reckoned among the nations. Once again, being isolated, marginalized, excluded, discriminated against. It's a very strong motif in this history, in this ideational collective ideas. More recent, the Holocaust constitutes another layer of collective trauma, intergenerational trauma. You don't have to firsthand experience the Holocaust to understand its significance, its impact on the Jewish people, on the insides. Again, many Jewish Israelis extracted a very straightforward lesson or insight. Never again. The State of Israel would not allow something to this effect, this magnitude, to happen ever again. And if you can think about October 7th that Audrey mentioned earlier, this is a triggering experience that kind of reminded Jews in Israel that the Holocaust, in a way, can repeat itself. And this is why they mentioned, including the prime minister at the time, mentioned that this is the worst case of violence and killing against the Jews since the Holocaust. This is another feature of Israeli foreign and security policy, this idea of kind of being cavalier, if you like, or being indifferent to other views. Our future does not depend on what the Gentiles will say, but on what the Jews will do, said David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister. It's a very strong, powerful message. He also disliked international organizations, especially the United Nations. Shmum, is the acronym in Hebrew of the United Nations. Shmum, basically dismissive. So shmum, I couldn't care less. It's nothing, meaningless. We'll talk about that in a moment. And these resonate, they remain kind of present, omnipresent. And perhaps the ultimate paradox of Israeli foreign security policy, this is in Yiddish, I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to try. This is Levi Eshkol, who was prime minister in the mid-60s, replacing David Ben-Gurion. He said that Israel is like Shimshon, the Nebuch kid, or in Yiddish, Samson the weakling. Despite the power, despite the very powerful, the most powerful army in the Middle East, Israelis and Israeli foreign policy is still in a mindset that Israel is weak, relatively weak. Certainly if you can think about the region as a whole, the entirety of the Middle East with all the Arab adversarial countries there. So how does the United States fit into this framework? Well, as we discussed last time, the United States holds many of the keys that allow Israel to stay safe and flourish in what I would call a rather challenging environment. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak used to say that Israel is a villa in the jungle. So the United States plays a significant role in allowing the villa to remain intact, or at least not completely destroyed. But once again, there's a paradox there. From the Israeli perspective, we kind of identified a couple of very strong, powerful ideas. How do they play out in a U.S. Israel context? On the one hand, we say that Israel wants to be self-reliant, wants to have a powerful military, doesn't want to be dependent on others. On the other hand, Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. aid, so very vulnerable, very dependent on an external actor. So this is one paradox. How do you maintain your sovereignty, your autonomy, your independence when you're so reliant on somebody else to provide both economic as well as military assistance? As I said, Ben-Gurion was very dismissive of the United Nations. Now, it was a bit more complicated than that, but very simplistically, one can argue that Israelis do not like the United Nations. They feel this is an international forum that is unfavorable to them, that is extremely one-sided, utterly anti-Israel, anti-Semitic at times. And as you can see on the top left side of the screen, the ambassador to the United Nations at the time said that the attack of October 7th was facilitated one way or another, sponsored by the United Nations. But nevertheless, Israel remains in the United Nations, remains committed to diplomacy, and is extremely dependent on the United States, as you can see in the chart below from 2023. The number of UN Security Council resolutions that were vetoed by the United States. These are resolutions criticizing Israel for its activities, its policies in the context of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Another one is, yes, Judaism is shared by both Jews in Israel and American Jews here, but not in the same way. Reform Judaism here in the United States is probably the most dominant, biggest, most influential group. In Israel, it's pretty insignificant. It is marginal for the most part. If you are religious in Israel, you're either Orthodox, modern Orthodox, but you're not Reformed. Reformed Jews are the exception in Israel. And there were a couple of very controversial comments made by Israeli parliamentarians and ministers. In 1989, for example, Reuven Rivlin, then a member of the Knesset of the Israeli parliament, later the president of the United States, visited a number of Reformed synagogues in the United States and commented, and I quote, "This is idol worship and not Judaism. Until now, I thought that Reform was a stream of Judaism. But after visiting two of their synagogues, I am convinced that this is a completely new religion without any connection to Judaism." In 2015, ultra-Orthodox member of Shas party, David Azulai, commented that the Reform movement stops following the religion of Israel. Let's say that's a problem, he said. I cannot allow myself to call such a person a Jew. So how do you reconcile these two? And last but not least, and it's very interesting, the idea of Aliyah, making Aliyah or emigrating to Israel. Yeah, even or despite the attack of October 7th, 2023, my apologies, thousands of Americans have emigrated to Israel, opened applications. They care about the state, but at the same time, there's a very strong degree of criticism of Israel. You can see the Pew Research Center's numbers from just last month, from March. Unfavorable 53. This is an increase of 11% compared to 2022, all US adults. Now there's significance, there's some variation there when it comes to age, certainly ideological inclination, Democrats, Republicans, but there's something there. So let's try to use a couple of recent examples to evaluate how this whole framework operates and manifests itself. And I want to highlight that it is not clear to what extent these ideas still impact policy or are kind of more in a more dormant stage. But you can see, we will see in a moment, some indication that there's some relevance nevertheless. So I'll try to share with you a couple of slides. The one thing is that, and I mentioned that in my previous talk, Benjamin Netanyahu really, really waited for Donald Trump to be elected. He thought that if Trump is elected, certainly once he took office, he will upend everything that Biden did from his perspective, change the course of U.S. foreign policy, do right with Israel, provided its military capabilities, support it unconditionally, arguing that Biden was too critical. He didn't allow the latitude, didn't allow Israel to actually pursue or execute the war as it wanted. But it was very interesting to see that even before the inauguration, Steve Witkoff, who will later become his envoy, Trump's envoy to the Middle East, certainly to the talks with Hamas, as well as Iran, we'll talk about Iran in a moment, he was coordinating the moves with the Biden administration. And together with staffers, senior staffers from the Biden White House, they orchestrated or facilitated the first ceasefire agreement. Moreover, and I believe I mentioned that as well, Benjamin Netanyahu, despite the self-sufficiency, despite the autonomy, despite the call for an Israeli independence that does not rely on others, despite the bravado, if you wish, succumbed, gave up when Steve Witkoff said, before inauguration, this agreement will be signed. I don't care, you do you, but at the end of the day, President-elect Trump wants a deal made, wants the ceasefire resolved, and it happened. And you can see some of the headlines at the time. Trump pushes Netanyahu to agree. A stern message. Envoy swayed Netanyahu. So at the same time where Israeli foreign and security policy, or these ideals of autonomy, self-sufficiency, independence, you see that at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, there's other elements there. Benjamin Netanyahu had no choice but to accept Trump's demand, which is very interesting. Benjamin Netanyahu was the first foreign leader to visit the White House post Trump's reelection. This says a lot about the relationship between the two countries, about how close and intimate the relationship between the two leaders perhaps is. Out of the blue, Trump introduces his plan for Gaza. Very controversial. Not only that, Benjamin Netanyahu was quite surprised. It was not something that they discussed or talked about before the meeting in the White House. And some of the details or the framework of that plan was extremely, extremely, extremely unprecedented. But Netanyahu had no choice but to nod in acceptance and play along. And you can see in the bottom left-hand side an AI illustration of the plan that somebody posted on social media showing both Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump in Trump Hotel in Gaza, and Elon Musk in the background. Unlike Biden, Netanyahu felt that Trump was more in control of US politics, especially Capitol Hill. And to a large extent, Benjamin Netanyahu was deprived of his own agency in making determinations or decisions. Again, it was Trump who came up with this day after plan, something that Netanyahu resisted throughout the first year of the war almost. Netanyahu was extremely dependent on the United States, and the United States was able, Trump himself was able to take advantage of that. And we'll see that again. Now, there's a lot of contradictions in Trump's policy. On the one hand, he insisted on facilitating the ceasefire agreement. On the other hand, he supported Benjamin Netanyahu's decision not to move forward to the second stage of the ceasefire agreement, that was territorial withdrawal, military withdrawal from major parts of the Gaza Strip. Trump renews military supplies or military aid, something that was prevented by the Biden administration. But on the other hand, Trump renewed his efforts to try and facilitate a ceasefire agreement, and indeed, Adam Boehler, his envoy, speaks directly with Hamas. So how do you square that circle? What does it say about Israeli foreign security policy? Is this a win or a loss? Is it full-blown Israeli independence, or is it more of the same, more reliance on the United States, on military capabilities, on diplomatic support? And I would argue that the meeting in April, just a couple of weeks ago, is very indicative. Now, you all saw the coverage of this meeting between Trump, J.D. Vance, and Zelensky. I would argue that Benjamin Netanyahu was, to some extent at least, was Zelensky. He was summoned to the White House on a short notice after he spent the weekend in Hungary with his wife in an official visit to Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. Netanyahu wanted to resolve a number of issues that were on the table, but he failed on each and every one of those. He wanted to deal with the tariffs that Trump imposed. He wanted to deal with Turkey and its involvement in Syria. And most importantly, he wanted to talk about Iran. And on all three, he failed. He came to see Trump, try to negotiate, but Trump, in a way, Zelensky did. The meeting, as the headline shows, indicated that there were major disagreements between the two individuals, between the two leaders. Netanyahu preemptively removed all tariffs against the United States, even before the meeting took place. But Trump did not remove the tariffs that he imposed on Israel. In fact, he was, kind of comment in passing, he was very much taken aback by the fact that Israel receives from the United States almost $4 billion a year, mostly military or financial aid. And he kind of said, good job. But he failed. Benjamin Netanyahu failed to persuade Trump to remove the tariffs. So is that an indication that Israel is reliant, less reliant on the United States? Is it independent? He also wanted to settle the affairs with regards to Turkey or Turkey in Syria and failed. Trump says, Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is a best friend of mine. You, Israel, need to behave. I'll talk to Erdogan, the president of Turkey. I have close relationship with him. But you don't do anything that disturbs that relationship that the United States has with Turkey. A major failure on behalf of the Prime Minister. Some of the headlines are in Hebrew just to show you that the Israeli press was very, very critical, especially when it comes to Iran. This is the hallmark. This is the main motivation of Benjamin Netanyahu since forever. You all recall the fact that he gave a speech in 2015 to a joint session of Congress without visiting the White House, coordinating this with the Speaker of the House, the Republican John Boehner. Major, major expression of partisanship. But again, Netanyahu is blindsided. Trump reveals that there's going to be direct talks with Iran within a few days. Just within a few days. And this is the same prime minister who opposed the Iranian nuclear deal, or the JCPOA at the time, and convinced, or was among those who convinced Trump to withdraw from the agreement unilaterally. And these headlines in Hebrew say that Benjamin Netanyahu was humiliated. Benjamin Netanyahu grovels in front of Trump, says one of the headlines. Came back empty, totally surprised. And so he's concerned, he's focused on the Iranian nuclear program, my apologies. He's meeting with Trump, and he comes back empty-handed. What does it mean? Well, according to some reports, Israel was about to attack the Iranian nuclear sites next month in May, but Trump blocked the whole thing, although he kind of pedaled back or walked back some of the comments. But he does insist on a diplomatic route, at least for the time being, something that Netanyahu opposes, has been opposing for a lot of time. Does it leave Israel more independent or more dependent on the United States? Is it more autonomous or less, given the actions, given the policies, given the remarks made by Trump? Does that contradict the pillars of Israeli foreign security policy? Yes, to a large extent. What does it mean long term? Not clear. Is Trump going to be successful? Not clear. But the Israelis tried to win back some of their influence on US foreign policy and had dispatched the director of the Mossad, the equivalent of the CIA, and Ron Dermer, Netanyahu's one of these closest aides and ministers, and they failed. They failed in convincing Witkoff, who wants to negotiate, diplomatically negotiate with the Iranians, to change course, to change strategy, to emphasize the military option at the expense of talking with the Iranians. Moreover, Witkoff apparently speaks with the Iranian foreign minister after the talks ended. Direct talks, something that Netanyahu would go bonkers had it been Biden in the White House. So what does it take us to? And again, we're running out of time, so I'm looking forward to the Q&A session in a second. Both Judaism and Zionism inform and shape Israeli foreign and security policy, each one in different ways. Mostly in a direction that entails that Jewish history is about trauma that is being relived in a number of cycles, if you wish. October 7th, 2023 is one example. Some of the connections are not necessarily direct. It's more implicit, more tacit, but it's clearly observable. There's a strong sense of collective trauma that drives Israeli policy, whether knowingly or not. It's there. Israelis are concerned, are afraid, despite the fact that they are the most powerful military force in the region. The relationship between the United States and Israel challenges some of the most basic pillars of Israeli foreign security policy, but it certainly is a net positive overall. It has no choice as the world's most prominent, most powerful power. Trump is extremely unpredictable, perhaps the most unpredictable leader in US history. And from an Israeli perspective, some of the initiatives align with what Israel wants, and others contradict directly the objectives, the goals that Israel has. This is going to be a very rocky ride for both parties, and it's just the beginning. It's only 3 months since Trump took office once again, and we'll see what happens next between the domestic politics in Israel, international affairs, military affairs, foreign relations, the United Nations, the Iranian nuclear program. This is going to be extremely, extremely interesting to follow. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the conversation now and the Q&A, hopefully.
Hey, thank you so much. Okay, there are a couple of questions here. Let's start with the Iranian issue. What's your best take on where that's going to go? Is Witkoff going to go back to kind of the Biden Obama delay tactics, or are we going to see some action from the United States on this?
Yeah, so the question is whether, first of all, whether there's a credible military option on the table. I would argue that Trump does not want to attack Iran, bottom line. He uses military capabilities or the military threat to try and push and persuade the Iranians that their best chances are to pursue a diplomatic solution to the whole crisis. It seems like, and I read some reports earlier today, that the Iranians will never, ever, never, ever relinquish their what they believe is their right to enrich uranium. The only question would be whether that will be to the degree that allows you to build a bomb or not, which is essentially what Obama achieved at the time back in 2015, and before that in 2013 in the preliminary agreement. The other question is whether the military facilities will be dismantled or not. And again, it's a question of whether there's a credible military option on the table and whether the Iranians are willing to concede that or not remains to be seen. As I said, it's going to be very, very tricky to say, but it seems like that Witkoff is in agreement, at least in theory or in principle, if you wish, that Iran will be able to retain or keep some of its nuclear, some elements of the nuclear program, but not the military one. The big question, or a related question, is whether a new agreement will address two of the points that were not addressed by the Obama-facilitated agreement at the time, and that is Iran's ballistic missile system and Iran's regional activities. It's what is perceived by many, both in Israel and here in the United States, as disruptive or destabilizing. Whether they will agree to have a package deal, something more robust that has both the nuclear, ballistic missiles, and regional revisionism or instability remains to be seen. But Trump says, I'm not in a rush. I have all the time in the world, and I want to make a deal, essentially. I don't want another one. So we'll see.
On a related topic, there's a question about Turkey. Is Erdogan truly against Israel? And how do you assess Turkey's military capacity?
There's so many ways to unpack that question. So thank you so much for this one. First of all, the relationship between Israel and Turkey has been going downhill for a long time. Even before the 2010 flotilla Mavi Marmara incident that I wrote about at the time, the relationship was, to say the least, very adversarial, very cold and minimum, one would argue. Certainly the war in Gaza had escalated the relationship or the degree of animosity between the two parties. It is almost personal for Erdogan to oppose and attack Israel. And there's an ideological logic to that. There's a religious rationale to that, both domestic and more regional. He hosted a bunch of Muslim Brotherhood leaders, including Hamas leaders, who operated, planned, and executed all kinds of nefarious activities against Israel. He's been calling for and kind of shut off all trade with Israel when the war started. So it's not going to improve. The problem here from the United States perspective is that Turkey is a major partner in NATO. So how do you reconcile the two? And when Israel was faced with that dilemma during the meeting in the White House just a couple of weeks ago, Trump was very unequivocal. And he said, Turkey is a friend of ours, or Erdogan is a friend of mine. I have a great relationship with him. And this has rang all the bells, if you'd like, or sounded all the alarms back in Israel. Certainly the prime minister was taken aback by that. What does it mean about the prospects of moving forward? Back in 2010, or after the incident of 2010, Obama facilitated a telephone conversation between Erdogan and Benjamin Netanyahu, who apologized for the flotilla, and then supposedly the relationship was normalized once again. Diplomatic relations were renewed. This time, I'm not so sure this will not be at the expense of Israel, and I think that this is something that concerns the prime minister very much.
Switching to Hamas, there's a question here about Hamas's future in Gaza, and that Western leaders have stated that Hamas will not be allowed to retain control, both political and military. But how will this be enforced?
Well, earlier today there was a report in Arab news outlets that there's a plan now on the table that was put forward by the mediators, by the Egyptians and the Qataris, that entails a 7-year ceasefire in return for the return of all the hostages, almost 60 of them still there, more than 550 days. Hamas will renounce its administrative control of the Gaza Strip. There will be kind of a functionary professional government. but it's not clear to what extent will Hamas disarm. So it is not clear whether this is the route or whether the president of the United States, Trump, is going to push for a renewed agreement that is based on the ceasefire agreement that he himself or his envoy facilitated at the time. Remains to be seen, because Israel has been increasing the military pressure on the ground, been dissecting the Gaza Strip, been moving Palestinians from the north to the south and back and forth. And there's calls within the Israeli government to increase the encroachment and even impose military rule or military regime, if you like, military control over the Gaza Strip moving forward.
Dr. Saltzman, you put a lot of time speaking about American-Israeli relation. Is there any significant other country that Israel needs to manage? Any other relationship of any other country besides the United States that Israel needs to manage a relationship with? And is it at times in Israel history, other countries have come to their aid, notably France at times and other times. So what about other countries?
This is a very good question. It was kind of at the heart of the dilemma of Israeli foreign security policy after the establishment of the State of Israel. For example, Israel's tried or kind of played around with the idea of non-alignment, rather than kind of, align itself with either the Soviet Union or the United States, to play kind of a neutral role. But it failed. It is so dependent on the United States or on the West that it doesn't have a real, genuine, kind of legitimate, pragmatic option. Nowadays, I am very much concerned that Israel is so isolated. It is such kind of had put itself into a kind of a status of an outcast almost. It has very few options other than the United States. Excuse me. Once again, Benjamin Netanyahu visited the United States just a couple of weeks ago after meeting Viktor Orban in Hungary. And he's one of the only European leaders who's able to accept him on an official visit, because there's a warrant for the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu, or at least the possibility of him being arrested. So, for example, when Benjamin Netanyahu travels to the United States, when he flies over, he's trying deliberately to avoid countries, if he needs to land, unfortunately, kind of an emergency landing, to avoid those countries where he might be arrested and might be extradited to The Hague. So the answer is yes, Israel traditionally tried to hedge or to diversify its portfolio, but it is now in a position where it's very, very, very difficult. Even this idea of normalizing the relationship with the Saudis has backfired after October 7th and the ground invasion and the prolonging of the war. Certainly this reluctance by the Israeli government to acknowledge or at least indicate that it's willing to consider a two-state solution, the creation of a Palestinian state after the ending of the hostilities and the release of the hostages and the removal of Hamas one way or another. So not too many options, unfortunately. And this only increases Israel's dependence on the United States, which gives Trump the leverage and to behave and respond the way that he did a couple of weeks ago in the White House, when Benjamin Netanyahu basically came to DC to beg Trump to remove the tariffs, or to not to engage the Iranians, or to put a military option on the table in case diplomacy fails.
And I take it there's no question that Israel needs the relationship with the United States.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. This is the most significant pillar in Israeli national security. It is not just the 3.8, almost $4 billion worth of military and financial aid. As I said, it's the diplomatic backing in the United Nations Security Council. It is the ability of the United States to penalize the ICC and the ICJ for whatever it's doing against Israeli leaders, which kind of aligns or taps into some of the feelings, some of the sentiment now in the White House against these international institutions, certainly the international courts. But certainly, absolutely, the United States is still essential. It is the most essential and critical component of Israeli national security.
So taking that fact, there is a question here, which is to contemplate what will happen in the future as potential future leaders from Ivy League schools lean into an anti-Israel stance. Given the dependency on the United States, that doesn't bode well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what will remain constant is the Israeli dependency on the United States. What will change dramatically over the next 5, 10, 15 years is the willingness of the United States to accommodate Israel's needs or demands or wishes, if you wish. You're absolutely right. The unfavorability rating, if you like, of Israel has increased, as I said, as I showed in one of the slides. And certainly this is even greater, more significant, more visible when you talk about the younger generation, 1835, especially on the democratic, liberal, progressive side of the political aisle here in the United States. So absolutely, I think that Trump will certainly be among one of the last presidents who are vocally, or at least in principle, pro-Israel. Certainly, we will not have a president in the White House like Joe Biden, who kind of unequivocally stated that he's a Zionist president. I think this is something that we will not see for a long time, if at all.
So here's a question about where do you think this deterioration of world opinion on Israel is coming from? Do you feel that the internal issues with the Supreme Court, the Attorney General, Ronan Barr, the demonstrations, etc., contributing to the deterioration of world opinion on Israel? And where do you think it comes from?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it channels all kinds of other trends that we see around the world. One might say here in the United States as well, but certainly in Europe, this backsliding, this turn towards less democratic, more authoritarian, more restrictive governance. Yes, it makes Israel less appealing, because one of the things that Israel, and I think I failed to mention that in my introduction, one of the things that Israel was very, very proud of, certainly Ben-Gurion and the others, is the fact that Israel is a democracy, committed to liberal democracy, albeit within the framework of a Jewish state, which is kind of an oxymoron in a sense. There's an internal contradiction there. But despite the fact that this is a state that is defined as both Jewish and democratic, it still remained committed to the, broadly speaking, the principles of liberalism and democracy. Now, when you have these moves taken, it didn't start recently, it even started before the October 7th attack, back when the Israeli Minister of Justice introduced his judicial reform or overhaul. This was trying to take over the legislature and the Supreme Court in Israel. And now the firing, or the attempt to fire both the AG, and this member of the audience is extremely savvy about that, as well as the head of the Shin Bet, is another indication, because as we saw yesterday in the documents that were submitted by Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, to the Israeli Supreme Court, that is now reviewing Benjamin Netanyahu's decision to sack him, to fire him. There are all kinds of revelations that entail or suggest that Benjamin Netanyahu treats the Shin Bet as if it's his own personal police force of some secret police force. To get all kinds of exemptions from his trial, to follow or to surveil his political opposition, members of civil society who he didn't like or didn't find very constructive during the war. It is very, very difficult. It is very reminiscent of things that we've seen in Turkey, in Hungary, in Poland to some extent, absolutely. And this might further undermine and cloud the basis, the joint basis, the common ground of the United States and Israel, this commitment to democratic values, to democracy and liberalism.
So in your opinion, is Israel still a democracy?
It's a democracy on life support in a number of ways, absolutely. It is a fault. I didn't go into the parliamentary system, which is intrinsically very fragile. It's not the United States where you vote for a president, unless they're impeached, Bob's your uncle, they can stay in power for the duration of the term. In Israel, it's much more fluid. There's much more, it's pretty much in flux all the time. And the relationship between the legislator, the legislative branch of government as well as the executive is much more fuzzy. I'll give you an example. What do I mean by that? The Israeli prime minister is also a member of the Knesset, of the Israeli parliament. For that matter, think about Trump not only being president, but also Speaker of the House, which is kind of interesting. It's pretty weird. The ministers, for the most part, most of them are members of the Knesset, so they both legislate and oversee and execute policy. We can talk about whether these reforms that were introduced in January 23, as well as some of the more recent actions that was taken, changing the composition of the Judicial Elections Committee, as well as the surveillance that Ronen Bar was alluding to, as well as some other initiatives. Does that make Israel a democracy? Yes, but a very, very fragile one at this moment. I would say it's pretty much on life support, and it's a very crucial period of time in Israeli democracy. Absolutely.
Okay, so we're nearing the end here. Very interesting questions and interesting way in which you frame the talk in terms of the soft issues and the more structural issues in terms of how to frame Israel foreign policy. Really interesting. So what would you like to leave us with? Some final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Always interesting and always appealing to put everything in a sentence, kind of in a soundbite of sorts. So the one thing that I want you to pay attention to is the connection between domestic politics in Israel and foreign and security policy. We didn't have enough time to get into that, but Henry Kissinger famously said once, Israel doesn't have foreign policy, only domestic politics. A lot of the foreign and security policy initiatives that you see now vis-a-vis the United States, in Israel itself, in the region itself, in Gaza, are a function of domestic forces that are operating. Israeli society is still under the cloud of October 7th. They are still experiencing the trauma. It's not even PTSD because there's no post. They're still in the trauma. They're not able to fully reconcile and come up and recompose themselves, if you wish, collectively. It is still driving the way that Israelis respond, the way they think, the way they feel about both Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere, about prospects for peace, about the relationship with other regional actors, and about their future for the most part. So this existential, some of the motifs that we discussed from the Haggadah, from the Bible, from Jewish experience, from Israeli Jewish experience, is still very much influential. It is very much impactful to this very day.
Mm-hmm. Okay, lots to think about. Thank you so much, Dr. Salzman, for your insightful presentation tonight. Lots to think about and to anticipate. Our next Scholar Circle features Dr. Scott Shea. Scott is Chai Mitzvah's founder and board president and the author of Conspiracy U, a case study. The topic will be Update on the Front Lines, Combating Corporate BDS. Scott's been doing some extensive work on that, and that will be on Tuesday, May the 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Tuesday, May 6th, 7 p.m. Please note that this lecture will not be recorded and will not be available on our website, and it is only available to people who are past Scholar Circle attendees. So this lecture will not be broadly announced on social media and other places that we usually announce our lectures. So all of you here tonight and all of you who registered are free to join this next lecture, but it will not be available broadly. So you will receive an invite for this by email. So thank you so much again, and hope to see you all on May the 6th at 7 p.m. Good night, all.
Thank you so much. Good night, folks.